Speaking of practice, the Arizona Cardinals red-white scrimmage starts today at 1:15 to 3:15. Before the event, Cardinals owner Michael Bidwell and head coach Jonathan Gannon will address the crowd as well. If you want to go, parking will be located on the east side and west side of the stadium and open up at 12:15. But, Ben, you've been out at camp this whole week, training camp for the Arizona Cardinals. Not a lot of buzz, not a lot of outside noise until this morning with BJ Ojulari news. Talk to me of some of your takeaways that you've seen from camp and then what you expect today in the red-white scrimmage.
Yeah, there's a few things with the Cardinals training camp that I've observed. The offensive line seems like it hasn't really taken a step forward yet, but it's so hard because the defensive and offensive line, they're going always at about 80% speed. But the biggest thing that I've seen behind the offensive line is not Kyler. Kyler looks really good. And also, Kyler Murray, he does not look small. Like, yeah, he's a little short, but he doesn't look small. Like, he looks like Russell Wilson out there. And with, like, the Bryce Young looks small. Like, he looks tiny. Kyler has put some real mass on to the point where, like, we talked about it earlier on the week on the drive with Jody Ayler, where it was like, did he put too much mass on? Like, is that going to affect him with soft tissue injuries and stuff? But backing up Kyler, I promise you, I guess I can't promise you anything, but I believe, I'd put money on it, Clayton Tune and Desmond Ridder do not make this team. They're terrible. Clayton Tune and Desmond Ridder, I mean, it's bad.
You think they go out there and
they're going to have to go get someone.
What they saw from Thursday with Case Keenum and with David Mills, you think that Davis Mills, you think they go out and make a trade for a backup quarterback? They're going to have to, which is like a backup quarterback for every other team in the NFL doesn't really matter. Let's just be honest. Kyler Murray's probably going to miss 2 games. He's probably going to miss 2 to 3 games every single year, whether it's a soft tissue injury, whatever it is. He does get a little banged up, but if you miss 2 to 3 games a year, it's not awful if you have the right backup quarterback in place. Especially with the middle of their schedule, when they play the Panthers, they play the Patriots. There's a little middle of their schedule where you hope that after the first 5 weeks, in which they got one of the toughest 5 weeks in the schedule, but also to your point about Kyler Murray adding more mass, I do like that from a standpoint where you hope he doesn't get injured as much. And with this offense and what Drew Petzing wants to do there with running the football, you do hope and ask, and there was interviews him talking about, a couple years ago you were averaging around 40, 50 yards per game rushing. That's decreased. What are your thoughts about that? And he said, look, I want to be able to run the football and use my legs, but if it's not mandatory and if it's not necessary, he doesn't mind it, which for him, longevity-wise in his career, I think that's a good sign and what Drew Petzing wants to do with him and his offense.
And I can't act like I pointed this out myself. I had Jody Ayler from the show that I'm on in the morning. He had kind of mentioned it when he went to Cardinals camp on Tuesday, because I went 3 separate times this week. And he was like, Desmond Ridder's terrible. And I was like, yeah, that doesn't shock me. And he even had a tweet that blew up that basically saying, I'm pounding the Falcons over because of seeing Desmond Ridder play with the Cardinals this year. That's how bad he was. It's not just Desmond Ridder. I was watching Clayton Tune yesterday. He's awful. Clayton Tune is awful. He's not a good backup quarterback. If Clayton Tune has to step in for any longer than a 1-game period, the Cardinals might be toast. Like, if they lose 1 game because one of those guys is in, it happens. But, it's bad. They're not accurate. Desmond Ridder at one point was throwing balls into the dirt on one-on-ones. There was no pass rush. Oof. It was bad at times. Oof. Clayton Tune. Greg Dortch made Clayton Tune look really good yesterday. Really, really good yesterday. One-handed snags, and people are oohing and awing, and I'm like, it's because Clayton Tune is missing guys. And this is like 10-yard out routes. This is nothing insane. It wasn't deep balls. So that was my first takeaway. Secondly, and we had mentioned this before, the running back room is going to be a lot better. But maybe don't spend such a high fantasy pick on Trey Benson. I think this is still, like, if you had asked me right after the draft, I would have said, James Conner is going to have a bulk of the carries for 9-10 games. Trey Benson is going to start splitting that in half at the 11-12 game mark. Yeah, I don't think so. Trey Benson, he doesn't look bad. Like, that's not, I have a ton of footage of watching Trey Benson, because a lot of the running back group is right next to the media. Like, you could touch them. They're so close to you. And at times, their equipment hits you. That's how close they are. Trey Benson looks a little lost right now. It seems like the game is just a little too... I wouldn't be shocked if Trey Benson's the 3rd-string running back.
Really?
Like, he hasn't looked amazing yet.
You know what's crazy you say that is, I was reading articles. I wasn't at camp this week, but trying to watch press conferences, watch interviews, watch your stuff, and just kind of all over the valley. And one of my biggest takeaways is
the emergence, I guess you could say emergence, he got a lot of reps last year of Amari DiMercado.
Yeah.
Which is a guy that, if he does play in that second role, great pass blocker, tough runner inside, a guy that played really well in that TCU season when they made the national championship game. 58 carries, 14 games played last year, 284 yards. That's another guy I don't mind getting reps as the second-string running back. And then a Michael Carter comes in who's able to catch the ball out of the backfield, kind of that Chase Edmonds feel that we do miss out of the backfield. But that's another guy to take away from me, Amari DiMercado, that stepped up. And to your point, it's not a bad thing if Trey Benson maybe sits back and takes time to develop. Look, an NFL playbook is one of the hardest things to learn, especially at the running back position, offense in general, because the amount of play calls, for him as a running back to be able to pick up blitzes, the running scheme, which they pride their most in for the Arizona Cardinals. I don't mind it, but it is very interesting to see a guy like DiMercado come in and step in. What have you seen from him and Michael Carter kind of battling, I guess, for that second running back spot?
Well, I told you a couple weeks ago, I don't think Amari DiMercado is going to make this team. I don't know if Michael Carter is going to make this team. Amari DiMercado, he's younger, a little bit bigger. Man, Michael Carter's really small. I mean, he's really small. I can't tell you how many times I'm just walking to the side of and I'm like, man, these are all massive human beings. They are all massive human beings. And then with Michael Carter, I'm like, oh, that guy, that guy is tiny. Amari DiMercado isn't necessarily there, and he's looked really good in some instances, and you're not going to cut Trey Benson, and DJ Dallas might be fielding kicks. So it's a loaded running back room where, it's a toss-up now between Amari DiMercado and Michael Carter, and honestly, I think I would lean DiMercado.
So let me ask you, too, you talked about it in our last segment about the cornerback room and expectations coming in. It's a young group. Again, you have what I think the Arizona Cardinals do well is in areas where they're young, they always get a veteran guy to kind of lead that room and say, you know what, we want you to be the number one, but kind of teach our younger guys, and hopefully they'll come in and replace you and kind of boost up that cornerback room. They did it for the defensive line, getting Nichols and Jones alongside Darius Robinson. It's the same thing with Sean Murphy-Bunting. In a room right now that looks really young, but I've heard a lot of good things about Max Melton. I've heard a lot of good things about Garrett Williams. And Starling Thomas the fifth, another guy that you said, hey, he might not make the roster. Another guy that got reps last year, I've heard, has made an appearance in camp too. What have you seen from the quarterback?
Yeah, so Starling Thomas got a couple of times yesterday, but it was all because Michael Wilson or Greg Dortch made really good catches. Here's why it's easier to evaluate the cornerback room. They're going up against a pretty good wide receiver room. Garrett Williams, Max Melton, and Sean Murphy-Bunting look like real-deal NFL dudes. None of them are Patrick Peterson. None of them are Darrelle Revis. But can they all be, I don't know, the later stages of Antonio Cromartie where he was on this Cardinals team and he was just a good corner? I don't think it's out of the question. Starling Thomas has looked decent. Not as good as the other three guys I'd mentioned look. Garrett Williams looks really good. Garrett Williams looks really good. And just kind of flipping it over just a second, because I've already kind of talked about the cornerback room, which does look like it's going to be at minimum average, which is such a big increase because it was garbage last year. It was so bad. Here's what I'll say. Just kind of flipping it because I've seen it against this very talented wide receiver room. Marvin Harrison Jr., there's two guys. Max Melton really matches up well with Marvin Harrison Jr., and we heard him talk about it. In a press conference with Marvin Harrison Jr., where had basically talked about how much Max Melton doesn't fear anyone. He has that confidence to want to be like that elite shutdown corner. He just is a corner. Like, in the most stereotypical way, this dude is just a dude, and he's a corner who can do it. And then as well as not just Marvin Harrison Jr., who I think's been good but not elite, which he's a rookie, give it time. Greg Dortch I've never bought into the Greg Dortch thing. I always just thought he was a very good wide receiver. I don't know what they're going to do. Greg Dortch has looked so good.